Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we are here to hold this defendant, Erica Stefanko, responsible for what she chose to do on June 21st, June 20th to June 21st of 2012. We are here to hold her accountable for the actions she chose to take. Ladies and gentlemen, in the words of Shakespeare, a rose by any other name is still the same. That means whether you hold the defendant responsible as the principal actor or as an accomplice, all paths, all roads, all lead to the same thing, that the defendant is guilty of aggravated murder and murder. Evidence and testimony will show that this murder could not have occurred without Erica Stefanko. Chad Cobb and Erica Stefanko planned it together, and they carried it out together. Now, as you listen to the evidence and testimony in this case, the state would ask that you keep the concept of complicity in the forefront. We would ask that you keep in mind that a person who knowingly aids, helps, assists, encourages, directs, or associates himself or herself with another, either for the purpose or in the commission of a crime, is regarded as if she were the principal offender and is just as guilty. As if she personally performed every act constituting the offense. The state would like that you keep in mind that as you listen to the testimony and evidence, that when two or more persons having a common purpose to commit a crime, and one does one part and the second does another, those acting together are equally guilty. The state would ask that you keep in mind as you listen to the testimony and evidence that a person who is complicit with another in the commission of a criminal offense is regarded as guilty as if she personally performed every act constituting the offense, even if she did not perform every act, even if she was not present at the time the offense was committed. Now, my co-counsel talked to you a little bit about that during jury selection and the example he gave about the mob boss in New York calling a hit in California, or the getaway driver in the car waiting for the individual in the bank robbing it. Okay, do you all remember that? Now, I said we're here to hold her responsible for her actions. What happened? Who all was involved? Well, what happened is Ashley Biggs was murdered. She was lured to her location. She was tased, beaten, zip-tied and strangled to her death, thrown in the back of her car, driven to an entirely different county, and dumped in a cornfield. That's what happened. Who all was involved? Ashley Biggs. She was 25 years old at the time, and she worked at Domino's Pizza. Ashley Biggs had a child, Grace Cobb, approximately 7 years old. She had just gotten temporary custody of. She was in a relationship with an individual named Brittany Dunson. They were with Grace Cobb at that time. And I stated she had just got temporary custody. That would have been from the father, Chad Cobb. Chad Cobb is currently in prison serving life without parole for the murder of Ashley Biggs. At that time, Chad Cobb was married to the defendant, at that time, Erica Cobb. So you have one couple on one side, Brittany Dunson and Ashley Biggs, and you have another couple on the other side, Chad Cobb and Erica, now known as Erica Stefanko, and you have a child in the middle, Grace Cobb. So, how did this come about? Well, on June 20th to June 21st, the defendant, Erica Stefanko, made a call to Domino's Pizza. That call lured Ashley Biggs to her death. And it wasn't just a phone call. That phone call came in at approximately 11:42 at night to a business that was closed, and not just to that business, but to the back door. That is what was specified, have the driver go to the back door of that business. And she used a fake name. Evidence and testimony will show once Ashley got to that business, and you saw that on the jury view, she was ambushed. She was ambushed. That's where she was tased. At that location is where she was beaten. And that is the location where that zip tie was placed around her neck, causing strangulation and her death. Evidence and testimony will show that Ashley Biggs did not leave that parking lot alive. Evidence and testimony will also show that the defendant had conversations. The defendant was under a tree. Evidence and testimony will show the prior calculation and design, what went into this crime. Evidence and testimony will show that the defendant laid in wait while this was happening to Ashley. And once Chad put her in the back of that car and drove away, the defendant followed him from that location that you were taken to on the jury view on West Turkeyfoot Lake Road to an entirely different county, to a cornfield. Once there, evidence and testimony will show that Chad drove Ashley Biggs' car. Can't drive two cars. Evidence and testimony will show that Chad was driving Ashley's car and the defendant was in tow, following right behind. He drove that car to the far corner of that cornfield, the far right corner, while the defendant waited. Evidence and testimony will show that when Chad Cobb came back, he was bloody. He was dirty. He just got done walking in the cornfield, and it was visible for all to see. And evidence and testimony will show that it was the defendant that drove him home to shower away the evidence. But thinking, if you look like this, Chad, what does the scene look like? So it was decided to go back to the scene and try to clean it up. And evidence and testimony will show that the defendant, Chad, and I failed to mention 4 children who were in tow. And I mean in tow from the beginning, from when the defendant made the call to lure Ashley to the building, from when she stayed and laid in wait in the car until it was over, when she drove a whole county over following Chad to the cornfield, when she went home for him to shower. And now these children in this car is coming back out to the crime scene for them to try to clean up the mess. And keep in mind of these times. However, evidence and testimony will show that it did not go as planned when they got back to the crime scene, for the police was already there. And what did they do? Together, they went and hid behind that detached garage at 731 Rex Lake Road. And this is approximately 3-4 o'clock in the morning with 4 kids in tow. That's what the evidence will show. That they were together through this whole thing. The planning, the execution, the cover-up. Now, evidence and testimony will show, and you will hear from different witnesses and see different things. I would like to talk about 2. You will hear from a Cindy Cobb. Evidence and testimony will show that Cindy Cobb secretly taped a conversation between her and the defendant. Evidence and testimony will show that this is a free-flowing conversation. Defendant is talking freely. And during that conversation, evidence and testimony will show that the defendant made several admissions. Admissions that prove prior calculation and design. Admissions that go to complicity. Evidence and testimony will show that during that conversation, the defendant said He came up with how to do it. He executed almost all of it. The part that he executed went totally awry. Evidence and testimony will show that the defendant is talking about Chad Cobb. The defendant admitted, because I remember the conversation that we had under the tree, because we really were literally under a tree when we had the conversation. And he's like, you know, if I do this, there's no turning back. Evidence and testimony will show that tree, that location, was at 647 Rex Lake Road, the scene of the murder. The defendant stated in that conversation, he would get this look on his face and be like, yeah, if this goes through and I can do this, I'm going to keep her skull as a trophy. During that conversation, evidence and testimony will show that Cindy Cobb said, at one time, you told me face to face that you made the phone call and you set the meeting up. I mean, that's what you had told me. Evidence and testimony will show the defendant's response, and there's no lie in that. She states, and there is no lie in that. But like I say, if Chad said, this is what we're going to do, and this is your part in it, and I carry out my part in it, I did exactly what he told me to do. It wasn't because he was forcing me to do it or like he had a gun to my head. She said it wasn't like he was forcing me to do it or like he had a gun to my head. It was because he says, this is your part and this is what you're going to do, which is how it always was. Evidence and testimony will show that goes to complicity, that she was part and parcel. The defendant stated, if what was supposed to happen that night happened, he had the perfect plan. But it didn't go the way it was supposed to go at all. And why that is, I don't know. Because he told it to me 2 different ways. It doesn't matter now. That goes to show, again, prior calculation and design. Evidence and testimony will show that the defendant stated, and this is again to Chad Cobb, you know what you can do and what you can't. If this is something that you can't do, then I'm okay with it. And I agree with it. If you can't do it, then obviously you shouldn't do it. And she goes on to state, I always threw the ball back in his court. I don't think those are the exact words that I used that night because we had already been over it so many times. Evidence and testimony will show that night meant the night of the murder. She said, I'm like, this is the only way the situation is going to go away. I feel like he felt pressured by me to do something about it. I should have at that point said, this is too risky. Because I just see him get away with so much shit that I thought he could get away with anything. Evidence and testimony will show in that conversation, if everything, the defendant said, if everything had been told exactly as it happened, and if everything had been told exactly as it happened, then we'd both be in prison right now. Then we would both be in prison right now. I don't disagree with that. That is totally the truth. These are Erica Stefanko's words. Cindy says, I mean, do I think it took 2 of you to get where you are today? Yeah. And the defendant replies, I'm not disagreeing with that, but it took 2 of us. He's trying to put it all on me. I have a problem with that. Again, whether you hold her accountable as the accomplice or as the principal, all roads lead to the defendant being guilty of aggravated murder and murder. She says, you know, you can't really function in everyday life if you're gonna look over your shoulder every second. Every time I hear a siren, I think they're coming for me. And that's something I'm gonna live with. But I don't need him contributing to it. The way he went about it, unless his real intention is to actually throw me in prison, I'm gonna need to make arrangements to see what's gonna happen to the kids. These are the defendant's statements, ladies and gentlemen, in a secretly recorded conversation where she is freely talking. Now, because of the rules of evidence, we may have to play that conversation. It's a little under 3 hours long. You may not be able to hear it. I just ask that you be patient with the state because of the rules of evidence. But when it's time to go back and deliberate, please take the time to listen to that tape. That's not the only time you'll hear about statements the defendant made. There's another witness by the name of Mary Brinkman. Mary Brinkman is her kids' godparents, an individual that she trusts enough to be godparents. And Mary Brinkman will testify, evidence and testimony will show the defendant admitted to dropping Chad off at that location. She admitted to following Chad, and she admitted to hiding out behind a detached garage. Ladies and gentlemen, evidence and testimony will also show there is no DNA evidence connecting this defendant to the scene. And the state would ask again, you keep in mind the concept of complicity and the mob boss who orders a hit in California, or the getaway driver who sits in the car while the person is in the bank. Once you listen to the evidence and testimony in this case, the state is positive, confident that you will find the defendant, Erica Stefanko, guilty of murder and aggravated murder, for it was the defendant who was part and parcel of the planning and execution of this murder against Ashley Biggs. It was the defendant who made that call and lured Ashley to her death. It was the defendant who laid in wait until Chad got in that car and was driving Ashley Biggs' body. It was the defendant that followed him to the cornfield and again waited for him to drive the car way to the right side and come back. It was the defendant who drove Chad home to clean up that dirt and blood that was on him. And it was the defendant, Erica Stefanko, who drove back to the crime scene. And it was the defendant who was found hiding with him behind that detached garage that night. And all of this with 4 children in the car, ages 7 to under 1. She was in it for a penny, in it for a pound. With that, ladies and gentlemen, the state would ask that you find the defendant guilty beyond a reasonable doubt of aggravated murder and murder. And thank you for your time and patience with this case.
I feel like it's been a while since we've seen each other, so I'll reintroduce myself. I'm Jeff Laybourne, along with Angie Killey and Mike Kranek here. We represent Erica. We really appreciate your patience in this, and generally, I know I can speak for all parties, we really appreciate your service. This is very important to the system, and obviously very important to Erica. Now, before I get into it, I just want to comment about something that the prosecutor, closed up with. In for a penny, in for a pound. In for a penny, in for a pound. I haven't heard that phrase in a long time, but I think what you're trying to say is, look, if you're involved a little bit, you're involved all the way. And I understand why she used that euphemism there. Because what you'll hear through the testimony and the evidence is that they've got about a penny's worth of evidence here against Erica Stefanko. What you will hear an overwhelming amount of evidence about is what Chad Cobb did. That he alone had the intent and purpose to do this. That he set it up alone. You'll hear evidence and testimony that he had a volatile relationship with Ashley Biggs, involving protection orders and things like that. What you'll hear is, based on all of that, is that he had the motive to do this, not Erica. You'll hear that that night, Chad Cobb was dressed head to toe in full camouflage. You'll hear that he was alone behind that building on West Turkey Foot Lake Road. You'll hear that he alone killed Ashley Biggs. You'll hear testimony that he used an assortment of tools and weapons that belonged to him, that were his property. You'll hear that he alone drove Ashley Biggs to that cornfield. You'll hear that that place was not just a random place that he picked. The place that he picked to drive her car and her body was a place that was special to he and Ashley Biggs. You'll hear that that place was their bridge. Not he and Erica, he and Ashley. You'll hear that this place also is not random in that it is very, very close to Chad Cobb's parents' home. You'll hear that he alone, not Erica, called his parents right after he committed the offense, including his mother, Cindy Cobb. We'll hear a lot about her. You'll hear that he alone needed clean clothes afterwards. You'll hear that he alone was hiding in those woods behind his grandmother's house. Not Erica, Chad. The property that he chose to hide at in those woods was his grandmother's house. You'll hear that his DNA and his DNA alone is at the crime scene. You'll hear that he purchased phone cards at Walmart. You'll hear that he and he alone was indicted for the murder of Ashley Biggs. You'll hear that he was facing aggravated murder, kidnapping, tampering with evidence, retaliation charges. And importantly, you'll hear that he and he alone was facing the death penalty. You'll hear that he accepted responsibility. That prosecutor right there dropped the death penalty. Chad Cobb pled to the charges in the indictment. He pled an agreement for them to drop the death penalty specification and that he would serve a sentence of life without parole. And at this point, you'll hear, once he gets to the prison, once he starts serving that life sentence, you'll hear that things started to change. What the government did not tell you in their opening statement is that while he did accept responsibility, shortly thereafter, he filed an appeal to withdraw his plea. You'll hear that that appeal was denied. You'll hear that that did not stop Chad Cobb. Because you're going to hear that Chad Cobb believes he's getting out of prison. And that belief is important to this case. You'll hear about his belief that he's getting out of prison. Importantly, you'll hear about his mother, Cindy Cobb, her belief that he's getting out of prison. She believes it. You'll hear about his daughter, Grace Cobb, believes he's getting out of prison. And as a result, the Cobbs have not stopped fighting for Chad. You're going to hear that they've undertaken additional appeals. You're going to hear that Chad Cobb has an attorney now to help him change his story. You're going to hear a lot about Chad Cobb and Cindy Cobb and Grace Cobb and about belief. What you're also going to hear is you're going to hear the prosecutor's illicit testimony that is going to be an attempt to make Erica look bad. And you're going to hear that they're going to try to use this looking bad testimony to try to stretch to an aggravated murder conviction. It's the penny and it's the pound. They've only got a penny, so they've got to throw that in there. They're going to use Grace Cobb to try to make her look bad, and therefore she's then guilty of aggravated murder. They're going to use Cindy Cobb, who tapes her secretly and doesn't turn this tape over for years and years until that belief started to bubble up. Chad's getting out. It's time to act. We've got to put this plan in motion and pin it on Erica. You're going to hear that pinning it on Erica solves a lot of problems for Chad Cobb and Cindy Cobb. They're going to use some allusions to, either directly or indirectly, that she had an affair with Chad Cobb's best friend, Mike Stefanko. That makes her guilty of murder. It's a penny. You're going to hear from Mike Stefanko, Erica's husband. They're married to this day. I ask that you not be fooled. So as I said, this case is about belief. You're going to hear testimony about belief. The belief of Chad Cobb and the belief of Cindy Cobb. And the belief that if they implicate Erica, it gets her out of the way. You're going to hear it's going to help get Chad out and get Erica in. That way Cindy Cobb doesn't have to deal with Erica, with the grandkids, custody, visitation, weekends. Cindy Cobb doesn't want to deal with any of that. They need her gone. Now, the state can talk about penny and a pound, but the judge is going to give you the instructions on complicity. And that's what she's getting at with the penny and the pound, but it's not that simple. You're going to hear that the government has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that she had the same criminal intent as Chad Cobb. So they've got to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that she had the same intent as Chad Cobb, that she shared the same purpose as Chad Cobb, that she shared the same state of mind as Chad Cobb. You're going to hear from Chad Cobb. And I want you to think about his state of mind and who could share it other than Chad Cobb. You're going to hear about co-defendant or co-conspirator testimony. And the judge is going to tell you to view that testimony with, quote, grave suspicion. That's Chad Cobb. You'll hear that Chad Cobb brought Erica and Cindy in on this thing after the fact. Chad Cobb committed this murder. And you'll hear testimony and you'll see evidence that at that point he needed help. After it was finished, he needed help. And he turned to two women in his life, Cindy Cobb and Erica Stefanko. Chad needed Erica's help because he got rid of his Ashley problem. Chad needed Cindy's help to get rid of his Erica problem. So again, I thank you all for being here. I thank you for being attentive thus far. We're going to all get through this, and I just ask you to pay very close attention to what is said up on that witness stand. Thank you.